The place where I am is one of the prettiest spots I have seen. Fine, level ground, beautiful woods, clear and bare of canes. Such were the words of French adventurer Pierre Le Moyne d'Iberville as he explored the verdant marshlands of southeast Louisiana at the close of the 17th century. Years earlier, La Salle had claimed the entire area for Louis XIV during one of the first European surveys of the American interior. Following the French Revolution, Iberville, a native French colonial hailing from what is now modern-day Quebec, was tasked with locating the mouth of the Mississippi River and assessing the military and economic potential of the vast, mysterious territory known then as La Louisiane. Iberville's brief notes accurately describe a unique ecosystem in a nearly untouched state, an immense freshwater estuary possessing a rich variety of flora and fauna. At the time, the lush, swampy terrain was home to small indigenous communities, linked by the same rivers and bayous that would eventually border two of the most populous areas in our state. This unusual combination of abundance and access led to the gradual misuse of the tranquil landscape that in the earliest months of the 18th century seemed a likely site for colonial expansion. The destruction of what to Iberville seemed a semi-tropical paradise did not appear to be an immediate reality, but was instead the result of incremental cycles of exploitation and industrialization, a process documented by the many artifacts left behind by those who fished, farmed, and even fought amongst the watery environment of the Manchac swamp. Thanks to the efforts of scholars, students, and those in our community dedicated to preserving the natural and cultural heritage of southeast Louisiana, many of these artifacts have been archived into one comprehensive collection, transforming the fascinating and often difficult story of the Manchac wetlands into an engaging, tactile experience.
These artifacts that are on display at Turtle Cove now, that are housed in the Turtle Cove and other collections in the Center for Southeast Louisiana Studies, tell us precisely the type of people that were living there, the time they lived there, what was important to them, the things they had to defend themselves against, how they collected their food, etc. It is far and away the best means we have for determining who the people were and how they lived.
The artifacts themselves reflect the impact of man on the biodiversity of the region, beginning with the area's first human inhabitants.
What's remarkable about the finds that we're getting in the Manchac Swamp area is they've demonstrated to us that Native American culture was not just one thing. It was in many different phases. There was a Mississippian culture that came forward to different cultures. There were the Petite Nations. It came all the way up to the Choctaw, which most people around here are familiar with. And each of these finds that we get can be traced to one cultural period or another. We might say, why would they have lived in a swamp like that? It was for protection because they were inaccessible. They could set up their villages there and be protected from any number of types of enemies, even animals and stuff, but certainly different tribes and Europeans as they came into the area. And so the protective quality of the Manchac Swamp and the forests that were once there is a key point of understanding why people would have lived there and why it should be important to us today.
European exploitation in the region was initiated with an eye towards establishing a French response to other vigorous colonization efforts already underway throughout North America. The earliest French settlers found life in the cypress swamp to be a perpetual struggle for survival and consequently had but a small impact on the local environment. Nonetheless, their efforts marked the beginning of a concerted effort to monetize the abundant natural resources of the territory, with little concern for the overall health of the ecosystem. These hardy adventurers usually limited their activities to trapping, trading, and emulating the slash-and-burn deforestation techniques favored by the indigenous inhabitants. Initiatives by the French to capitalize on the strategic importance of Louisiana territories were lackluster at best, due to global conflict and political intrigue Dominion over most of the area switched from France to Spain and back again in the years following the French and Indian War and the American Revolution. The Manchac Swamp and its northern shore remained part of Spanish Florida until 1810, when a small revolt among English-speaking settlers created the short-lived Republic of West Florida. The insurrection provided the impetus for the area's eventual absorption into the larger American-held Louisiana Territory. With the acquisition of the region by the United States came a steady and determined attempt to alter the landscape in ways that would prove to be nearly irreversible. In 1814, Andrew Jackson forever obstructed the connection of Bayou Manchac to the Mississippi River in a maneuver designed to deny the British a backdoor route to New Orleans. By the mid-19th century, German immigrants had established the farming community of Frenier. Located midway between Ponchatoula and Lake Pontchartrain's southern shore, it was a significant marker of industrious activity within what was once thought of as an impenetrable swampland.
I guess we could say this marks the beginning of human habitation, aside from the indigenous population of 3,000 years ago, to come into the Manchac area. These German immigrants were cabbage farmers and very successful. These Germans also started cutting very limited numbers of cypress trees to make cedar shingles, cypress cisterns. But again, the exploitation of that 15,000 acres there at Manchac was very limited.
The construction of the New Orleans, Jackson, and Great Northern Railroad, which began in 1852, indicated a desire by moneyed interests to reshape the land for their own economic gain. However, many of these plans were brought to a halt in 1861 by the Civil War. During this time, the meandering bayous and dense stands of ancient cypress existed as a sort of no man's land between Union-occupied New Orleans and bands of tenacious Confederates scattered throughout the Florida parishes.
Ponchatoula was set up as a base to try to retake New Orleans. And so it was a key location for both sides, and the Federals were determined to come out of New Orleans and take it, and the Confederates were determined to hold it at all costs. And one of the things that the Yankees found out very quickly, that getting across the Manchac Swamp was tough. And the only way they could really do it effectively was by coming up the railroad. And the very first time they tried that, they had 11 men fall out in the ranks, and a couple of them die from what they called heat exhaustion, meaning they weren't used to walking through a swampy, fetid area in the middle of the summer heat, and it took a heavy toll on them. But of course the Federals had overwhelming might and power. They captured the tin-clad ram Barataria from the Confederates and used it with a couple of other schooners to try to interdict trade. And of course, you know, deprivation of everything was occurring in Confederate-held territory. So keeping those lines of trade open were very important to the Confederates, just as they were interdicting them to the Federals. Then in 1863, they came up the railroad and even sent a swinging force around through Wadesboro, which took them over into the Manchac Swamp near the mouth of the Natalbany River and up Ponchatoula Creek to attack Ponchatoula from several different directions. But even after their successful looting of Ponchatoula that time, which one of the Federal officers themselves described as the legendary savagery of the Turks had not been more thorough, the Confederates were able to drive them back out of the town, back down to Manchac, and the Federals realized that it's going to be best for us to just fortify the south side, where they set up some cannons and kept some soldiers stationed for the rest of the war, as the Confederates tried to keep a presence on the north side.
The conclusion of the war left the Florida parishes in a state of near total social and economic collapse. Despondency and desperation left the area particularly vulnerable to schemes hatched by northern industrial interests to transform the area into the next major hub of logging activity. The depletion of older stands of virgin forest in the Northeast and Midwest coincided with innovations that transformed the extraction of large trees, even from dense swampland, into a routine activity.
In the 1880s, The cypress exploitation in the Manchac swamp started with the invention of the pull boat, which was actually a barge with a steam powered winch on it, and loggers would go out into the swamp, cut down the trees, the cypress trees, and the winch with about 3,000 foot of steel cable would pull those cypress logs back to the waterway. The logs would be rafted up and would be floated to a sawmill. The period of the 1890s saw the construction of the Rudock Orleans Cypress Lumber Company. In Rudock, it at one time employed 750 people out in the middle of nowhere. Throughout the 1930s, the Louisiana Cypress Lumber Company mill operated there south of Ponchatoula. They, for 20 years, clear-cut that cypress forest, and the last cypress tree was taken out in 1956. And so a period of about 20 years it took them to clear-cut a virgin cypress forest.
While steam skidders and dummy lines were quite effective in hastening the destruction of a once pristine natural wonder, there were, and still are, more subtle threats to this ecosystem. The 1930s marked the appearance of the nutria, a prolific animal with a hardy and quite unfortunate appetite for swamp grass and cypress saplings, plants vital to the continued health of the Manchac swamp. The cuts and runs gouged into the landscape by the cypress loggers and the ever-present nutria remain as a testament to the area's precarious ecological state, along with even newer invasive phenomenon such as the nearly impenetrable mats of salvinia grass. The ancient forest that just a century ago seemed limitless in both its bounty and potential now exists mostly in the historical record. However, a small 100-acre tract tucked away deep in the Maurepas marshes between the Tangipahoa River and I-55 survives to this day largely intact, a living testament to our troubled environmental legacy. Even amid the ongoing degradation of the Manchac ecosystem, the area gained popularity as a recreational destination. Sportsmen did not rely on the marsh for their livelihood, but instead were attracted to the still abundant populations of deer and game fish. New Orleans businessman Edward G. Schlater was so enamored of the area that in 1908 he built a hunting lodge on the Pass Manchac waterway. The lodge was eventually leased to the private Turtle Cove Club and was later acquired by the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries in 1975. Recognizing an opportunity to develop a local site for vital, hands-on scientific inquiry, Southeastern Louisiana University assumed control of the site in 1981 and created the Turtle Cove Environmental Research Station.
Southeastern came in and they did a lot of research and was involved with the cleanup, the planting of cypress trees. They planted thousands of cypress trees in the wetlands out here. The educational program, I've had kids come on the pontoon boat 25 years ago. A lot of them come back with their kids now. We got a lot of support because they all know that Turtle Cove has been active and responsible in a way and helpful to the cleanup of all the lakes and waters around us and planting trees. It's all been good.
The data obtained by the students and scholars at Turtle Cove is instrumental in learning to ameliorate and possibly even prevent future catastrophes. Examples of such research include the recent discovery of an overall decrease of salinity levels within the Manchac ecosystem. Due primarily to the closure of the Mississippi River Gulf outlet in 2009, these findings point to increased rates of survivability among cypress saplings in the area. Such studies, some of which are conducted in coordination with the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation and the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana, cannot exist without a dedicated academic foundation and the support of the local community. In October of 2017, a fundraiser was held at Turtle Cove to both highlight a legacy of valuable scientific research and recognize the fascinating history of the area as evidenced by this amazing collection of artifacts.
We are losing an enormous amount of acreage every year to storm surges, saltwater intrusion, pollution, and a variety of other factors. And these swamps and marshes provide barrier island protection from storms. So our purpose of the function today is to raise money for needed maintenance and equipment purchases, but also to educate the public in terms of the importance of researching the preservation and conservation of our priceless hardwood bottomland swamps and marshes.
So we're so happy to be out here, so happy to be supporting this group, and so happy to be supporting Southeastern as a valued partner in this fight. So thank you so much for coming out. Really appreciate it.
Unique in its status as a bridge between a destructive past and a cautiously optimistic future, the Turtle Cove Environmental Research Station is a resource for those who value the history and ecology of this natural wonder. Turtle Cove exists as not only a working research station documenting the stunning biodiversity of this region, but as a permanent home for a treasured collection of artifacts and historical documents. Relics that serve as evidence of the impact of human habitation and intervention within one of America's largest inland estuaries, the troubled waters of the Manchac swamp ecosystem.